So let's talk affixes coming in 10.1 in Dragonflight. Blizzard just released a blue post last night detailing a bunch of changes for some of the new affixes that are coming, as well as some of the more long-standing affixes that we've had, such as bolstering. There are quite a few dramatic changes to how some of these affixes are going to be working, and I think overall the reaction on Twitter and from people generally in the WoW community has been quite positive. People seem quite excited now for 10.1 when they were previously, even just a couple of weeks ago, 10 days ago, were quite pessimistic, including myself. I was not looking forward to some of these affixes, but I think overall now it is looking like Mythic Plus in Season 2 of Dragonflight could be quite strong. But you know, I'll let you guys be the final deciders here in this one. So, Blizzard is looking to change the way in which affixes are going to kind of be implemented in Mythic Plus, where they're going to start with... so, you'll have Fortified or Tyrannical, I believe, from a +2 onwards. So, those will still be present. Those will still kind of be moving forward in Dragonflight. But they're then changing. Some affixes are going to be coming in at level 7. And then other affixes are going to be coming in at level 14. Or higher, which is quite interesting because that's quite late coming in at level 14 with some of these affixes. So it'll allow a lot of the player base to get to grips more so with the dungeons before they then start getting overwhelmed with these additional affix mechanics and stuff like that that they then have to consider as well, which has its pros and its cons, which we can kind of talk about. For me in general, I feel like Mythic Plus does need to be quite punishing in order for people to learn. You don't really learn something unless you're forced to, really. So if something hits you for 10% of your health, you kind of ignore it. It's just white noise. It doesn't matter. When something one-shots you, you suddenly, what was that? What happened there? Was that a spell cast? Did I stand in something? Was it a frontal? Like, what happened? So I do feel like there does need to be some kind of increasing challenge for people to actually learn the dungeons. I know I've been in dungeons as high as +23s this season where people are not quite sure of what's going on in the dungeon. They don't quite know what mobs do. They don't always know what interrupts are most important. They might not understand some fairly common maneuvers that happen in Mythic Plus, like certain routes or certain interactions you might have. Say, last boss of Notkud, pulling away the two mobs before you then engage the boss to allow the mobs to reset and prevent those chaining into combat with the boss. Stuff like that, where people don't always know. So I do feel like there does still need to be some kind of challenge here, but generally speaking, I think this should be pretty good because it will give people time to just get used to the base dungeon. And that's a big positive because I think it can be quite overwhelming for a lot of people to go into Mythic Plus and just feel like, I've got all these affixes to deal with, and, you know, the changes between Fortified and Tyrannical each week and the difference in scaling. And, just the fact that dungeons are going to be changing every season in an expansion can be quite overwhelming for a lot of people. I know some people are going to be quite apprehensive to jump into Mythic Plus as a result of this, but I do think this is quite good. I mean, all of these affixes do have some kind of agency to them. I do more so think that these level 7 affixes have more agency. A lot of this is more so kind of being aware of your surroundings, whereas some of these level 14 ones are more so just, they change the way in which the dungeon might be done. If it's Sanguine, you might do a pull slightly differently, or if it's like bolstering, you might do a pull slightly differently, right? Raging and whatnot. Whereas like these things like afflicted and incorporeal, entangling, like that's gonna have player agency where you need to be aware of your surroundings and you need to be making sure you're aware of where you're positioned and where the mobs are, and you know, these things that are gonna crop up into the fight on top of what's already going to happen. So I do feel like it's good to give player agency early on so they can get used to dealing with a more hectic gameplay early on in Mythic Plus, so it doesn't come as quite a surprise or quite as a shock as you go through the higher levels of difficulty. And then this so on the 14 or higher, Spiteful, Raging, Bursting, Bolstering, Sanguine, these are all just going to affect like more so a tanking route or something, or the overall way in which you're going to play the key. So I do think that's quite good because this is personal performance, and this is more, well, generally speaking, this is personal performance, and generally speaking, this is group coordination and group performance. And I do think that group performance should come at a later stage compared to personal performance. You should be able to go quite far just based on your own merits, generally speaking. So they've made some changes to how these affixes are generally going to play. So explosive is actually going to get removed. They did implement this briefly onto the PTR, and you had explosives that had 600k health that had to die very, very quickly within a couple seconds, and that was quite hectic. That's quite a lot of health to be able to do. So they've removed it, which I think is great. The reason I really disliked Explosive, and by the way, it is going to be replaced with Volcanic. So, okay, cool. I mean, Volcanic Volcanic can be quite annoying for range, but it's not really like a hard affix to deal with, so you can focus more so in the dungeon. Okay. But the reason I disliked Explosive is because a lot of the time it was a UI issue. It was a case of you already have a lot going on your screen. You have certain interrupts that you're doing. You have frontals to be careful of, things that you need to avoid standing in. You have to watch your own health, be doing your rotation optimally. All these various things that you're doing in a dungeon. And then your health frames can kind of just get cluttered where these explosives spawn. And sometimes you get 4 spawn at the same time. And it just kind of like... you lose perspective on what's going on. So that's why I kind of quite disliked Explosive. And I know for a lot of people it's quite similar. A lot of people that I spoke to anyway, it was a similar thing. Or it made some pulls just kind of impossible. You go and do the big pull in Academy and it's like, oh, Explosives everywhere, and just a bit too much. So I'm cool with Explosive going. I think that's okay. Incorporeal. So beings now fade away when combat with non-incorporeal beings has ended. So this is the affix that spawns a mob which then needs to be interrupted. So this is good that it disappears when combat ends, because imagine, this was my concern initially, is what if you wanted to chain mobs and you couldn't because the mob's standing there casting? That could be quite awkward. It could be awkward for healers having to reset their mana, get some mana breaks. It could be awkward for re-stealth classes and that kind of thing. So for me, that's quite cool that that's going to disappear now. That makes it a bit better to deal with. Entangling, so they've reduced the snare effect to 30%. It was 50%, so... okay, I'm still not a massive fan of like movement speed decreases in Mythic Plus. I think that is really infuriating, but maybe this will be better now. Entangling has a visual indicating the maximum range of the vine, so that should be quite good. You should be able to easily at least like calculate the movement, so that makes it a bit better to deal with. And it now has a distinct sound cue when applied to players, so that will actually help a lot of people. First of all, just a lot of people use sound cues weak auras anyway, but that will also help people that are maybe visually impaired as well. If they have some kind of sound cue, that will help them, so I think that's quite good, and encourages kind of just helps out for people that would otherwise have issues with that. Afflicted, Souls health no longer scale after Keystone level 20, so these are mobs that need to either be healed up or dispelled. If you have multiple spawn at a time, obviously dispel is going to have a CD, so this would be where you'd look to heal them as well. So that's good. It means that there's a certain cutoff. It's something like I think they did it with bursting. They put a cap on bursting scaling or something like that. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I think it's sometimes good to cap the scaling of things beyond a certain level. Same with Spiteful, right? They've done that with Spiteful. The Shade's health and damage no longer scale after Keystone level 20, and they've also reduced the damage that they deal. I think Spiteful is quite an awkward affix to deal with, because it's a case of you already have everything going on. Maybe you need to do your kick, and then you need to move into melee to like do your kick, and you can't because there's a shade running at you, and then you need to call backup, and if you're not on Discord or something, then you can't really call a backup, and it can be quite awkward to deal with. Spiteful, I think, needs to be something that does maybe like 20-30% of your health per hit. Not massive, but enough that if you're also taking unavoidable damage, because in Mythic Plus, unavoidable damage should never kill you because it's unavoidable, as long as you're rotating defensives and whatnot. But avoidable damage should, because avoidable damage, by nature, is avoidable. So you should be punished for getting hit by avoidable things, and you should not be so heavily punished for unavoidable damage, because you can't help it. So Spiteful is something that is avoidable damage. However, when you take... these mobs can one-shot you. I've been in dungeon, you're doing a 26, 27. These mobs one-shot you. It's too much, especially when there are multiple at a time. And again, health frames can get cluttered, much like with Explosive. So if it's a case of they do, like, say unavoidable damage does 80-90% of your health, you would live, and then you play poorly and you get hit by a Spiteful, right, now you're going to die. But I don't think by default a Spiteful should just outright kill you. So I think reducing the amount of damage and the scaling is good on Spiteful. So that's quite good, I think. Now, Raging now grants creatures immunity to crowd control effects for 20 seconds upon reaching 30% health remaining. Was 50% increased damage done until defeated. So that is quite interesting. I don't know how I feel about that one. I think in general, like, I mean, you're going to want Soothe that week, that's for sure, but I'm still not made up my mind on this one yet. I want to see how it plays out a little bit. Admittedly, initially, I'm a little bit wary of that, but maybe it will actually not be as bad as it sounds. And then Bolstering, this is the really, really big one, I think. Bolster no longer increases the health of affected creatures. Was health and damage. So now, yeah, they're going to do more damage, but they won't have more health, which means that you can still kind of blast them down, and it's not so bad if things do bolster by 10 stacks. Maybe your tank has to kite, or you can use some kind of CC to keep them away from your tank or whatnot, but they're not just going to be doing, you know, you bolster something by 10 stacks at 100% health, and now it's like a boss in itself. They've already made bolstering a lot better by having a drop-off effect on it, having a timer on it, but now to no longer scale on the health, I mean, I think this is awesome, because it's still a threat. It's still doing what it needs to be doing, which is threatening the tank if played poorly, but it's not at the detriment of the whole key. So I think that's quite good. Because, you know, sometimes you bolster things too much and then the key's over because you took too long. So it's not increasing the amount of time that you're in combat necessarily, which is good. And then you have Sanguine. Sanguine Ica puddles now last for 12 seconds, was 20. So I think this is good. I think they could still go a step further and put a maximum amount of healing on Sanguine. So maybe mobs can only heal 30% of their max health, and then it caps out, and then Sanguine, even if they stand in Sanguine, then who cares? It doesn't matter. I would maybe like something like that, or as mobs heal, the Sanguine pool shrinks, and it's 12 second long. You know, either or is fine, but I think Sanguine could still go a step further, but I think that's fine. 12 seconds is quite reasonable, so that should be a lot better. So overall, I'm quite happy. I still think that, generally speaking, they could improve affixes in the sense of making them more fun. I think affixes should make dungeons more fun, or put a different spin on them rather than just outright making them more difficult. I think the fact that they're infinitely scaling with Fortified and Bolstering, and then just the scaling system itself, I think that already makes them hard enough eventually. So adding in some affixes that are just fun and goofy, and some of these seasonal affixes, for example, like my favorite was Reaping, because you could still die to it. I had experiences where people did die to it in my groups, but it was like a nice reward. You looked forward to it. It was quite fun. So I would like to see fun affixes. I mean, Awakening was good as well. They've had various good seasonal affixes. I just think they could throw in a few more kisses. But that's what I think on some of these affixes. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in 10.1.